When it comes to reserve studies, not all approaches are created equal. Some associations rely on professional, independent studies. Others attempt to save money and build their own plans. But without an objective, independent analysis that integrates current costs and industry standards, these homemade approaches can introduce significant risk. In this section of our Psychology of Reserves webinar, we compare professional and self-prepared reserve studies, highlighting the differences in accuracy, credibility, and long-term outcomes. That's important because the quality of your plan directly impacts the quality of the decisions you make based on those plans.
Why do we need a reserve study? Why do we need someone to tell us that we don't have enough money and they're too expensive and they're projections based upon guesses? That's what I hear people say at meetings. Brian?
Right. And so we've talked about this of re-anchoring the problem. We've talked about the path dependence, a gradual path going towards the right destination. And so I have found when we're talking about this and we receive this sort of pushback at a meeting, it can be intimidating. The reason why it's intimidating, if you're a board member or you're a manager, you just want things to run smoothly. But also you have a group of angry people yelling at you. It's no fun. We completely understand it. So how can we talk about this potentially emotional topic? Because we're talking about finances. Finances always become emotional. So how do we talk about the reserve study in a way that can create clarity? So I have found that a really good way to talk about the reserve study is that it's a map and it's a guideline. So when we're on a road trip, let's just say I want to take my kids to New York City or something like that. The first thing I need to know is where's my starting point, right? If I pull my map out or my GPS, where's my starting point? Now I need to know what my destination is, okay? So I have those 2 points of reference. Now I can go on my trip. Now, do I throw my phone out the window because it's wrong and the GPS is wrong because I hit traffic and there's an accident and it was misleading me? Or do I go, let me recalibrate. Here's my new starting point. Is there a faster way around this detour, whatever it may be? Recalibrate. And then still I have the same destination. My destination didn't change. Okay, so that's a good analogy to think about the reserve study. The reserve study is a map and a guideline that tells us, first of all, where are we financially today? Where are our finances today? And then what's our destination? What's our goal? What's our trajectory? Okay, so when we frame that picture for our owners at our property, they go, okay, got it. Because what's our alternative? We could put our heads in the sand, but we don't even know where we're driving. We might be driving to Mexico, right? Like we need to make sure we're going in the right direction, first of all. So the reserve study, think of it as painting a more accurate picture of what is going on at your property. Okay, we think we have enough money. Well, relative to what? If you have liabilities or expenses for your association of over $1 million, but you have $500,000 in reserves, is that enough? Right? Like we have to look at the numbers first before we can actually make a conclusion. Additionally, when you're at that board meeting, it's helpful to put a reserve study up there because you might feel like you have a target on your back, but really rather you just put the reserve study up and then you can move out of the way and say, well, here's the thing that's telling us what to do. Here's the thing that's informing us, right? And again, I want to actually clarify when I say tell you what you have to do. It's just telling you, here's the reality of what we're seeing or what we're facing at our association. This is what the costs are to replace a roof today. It's whatever, $200,000 or something like that, right? It could be quite expensive, but it's not you that's getting the target on the back. Rather, it's the reserve study telling the owners of the property, here is what it costs to live here. Here's the rate of deterioration or the cost of deterioration that we're experiencing on our property's components. And so now that allows your owners to say, okay, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, but I understand we have our roof to take care of. We have our siding to take care of. We have an asphalt to take care of. We have an elevator to take care of. Now they can hopefully calm down to understand that these costs are what they are. They can call a few vendors to price check if they want, but now they're actually making decisions on what to do moving forward, right? They're actually driving down the road now that they've seen the cost, now that they've seen what the true cost of ownership is. And we hope that this would then provide clarity and calmness. And then David, as far as minimizing lawsuits, what have you seen there when you have a reserve study versus when you don't have a reserve study?
Well, we'll talk about, hang on, let me just double check this. Yeah, I haven't seen a ton of lawsuits on reserve studies. You know, there's a lot of low-level grumbling about why did we get to this point. who's to blame, and it might have been a problem that has been 30 years in the making. So I haven't personally seen a ton of, well, I don't think I've even seen one of where the association was accused of not properly reserving, just because it's something that people, whether they admit it or not, they have access to the data. They have the ability to go to meetings. They have the ability in most states to look at the financial records of the association, and it's a shared responsibility. But to me, it's important. You said, we talk about having the homeowners calm down. It's super important, I think, for the board to calm down as well, and to rely on the experts to make this pitch, which is really just an educational presentation. And it doesn't, one of the problems I see in this situation where they get a reserve study, an association may not have had one for years, and they get it and they have this feeling of whiplash when they see what it shows. And it's like, okay, this is data about our community, and the homeowners ultimately make the decisions on funding. And if they don't make decisions on funding, they make decisions on who's elected to the board to make decisions on funding. And this is not just the board's problem. This is the community's problem or puzzle to solve with good data and hopefully collaborative information. And the stress of a board getting that whiplash-like reserve study sometimes causes board members to try to overcorrect, and the homeowners resist far more vigorously than is helpful. And so for me, it's like, okay, this is information, and now we have to chart a course forward. And it's really hard to do without that reserve study, because otherwise it's just a guess. And similar to guessing is the concept of a homemade reserve study. And I'm not trying to insult anyone who's an engineer or a reserve study professional, which are very rare in the world, who made their own reserve study. But a homemade reserve study to me is, as I say it generically, a problem. Why? Because you may not have the expertise to generate a reserve study. You might not know how much things cost. You might not know how exterior components fit together to keep water out. And when you do things in conformance with the lack of knowledge that you possess or don't possess, you can take on individual liability if you're wrong. And forget the liability issue. It doesn't convince the skeptical owners that they need to contribute more to pay to resolve something. It falls flat on its face, and I've been to many, many meetings with this homemade reserve study, and it's just an instant credibility depleter when you don't have a reserve study that is done by somebody. This is my opinion. I don't sell reserve studies. It's just so much more credible to have a professional reserve study. And they say, we don't trust your reserve study. What do you know about reserve studies? Brian?
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of leads in from that clarity minimizing lawsuits. And we see there that, well, if we don't have a reserve study, maybe the first level of opposition will be like, well, okay, I know John over here. John used to work in finance. I think he knows his way around a spreadsheet. And John might stand up and say, yeah, I can save us some bucks. I'll just do the reserve study myself, right? That's generally how the flow of thought goes. We don't have a reserve study. We don't want to get a reserve study. So why don't we just tap someone who maybe can run a spreadsheet and see what they can do for us? Now, this is the image that pops into my brain is hold my beer and let me figure this out. All right. So hold my beer. If you haven't been around a bunch of 25-year-old guys, generally speaking, a lot of bad decisions are made when you say, hey, do you think I could jump over that thing? And he'll hold my beer. Let me see if I can do it. Not that I have no experience of that. I've just heard it through the grapevine from friends. Those are some bad choices that way, some hospital visits. And so when we start to take on that sort of project as an owner, as a board member, I just look at it as it's starting off in the wrong direction. Again, if you want to run your own budget and see, okay, based on what the reserve study says, I want to run my own budget, kind of cross-reference things, totally fine. But what we want to be careful of is now saying we don't want to spend the money on a professional reserve study. Rather, we're going to use one of our own, tap our own people to now make budget recommendations that influence the financials of our associations and how it runs, neglecting the fact that this is a multi-million-dollar not-for-profit real estate corporation. So you're just taking it on. And so where are the problems, right? The problems are, number one, it's just when you pay for the diligence of a reserve professional, you're getting that professional unbiased recommendation from that professional. When I complete a reserve study, I want to complete it in accordance to National Reserve Study standards. Therefore, I have no sort of emotions when it comes to if I have to recommend a special assessment because the association has a large project due this year, or if I'm just making small recommendations for the client. Of course, we feel for the association, but we cannot be biased to make different financial recommendations because our sole purpose is to create a reserve study in accordance to National Reserve Study standards. But in response to the question of, well, we just want to save a few bucks, what we find is that the cost that you're saving is really negligible. Because if you're just deferring a project or you're making a quick little change on the reserve study because you don't want to have to replace that roof next year, most likely that roof is going to go up in cost next year. Some of the inflationary pressures on that roof or potentially some deferred maintenance on that roof, it's going to wipe out any savings that you had by getting a reserve study done. So we're just saying the reserve study cost relative to the components at your property is minor. And then as David already touched on, who are they going to believe, right? Again, you are making a presentation to your owners that they should potentially either stay the same or increase the reserves. Are they going to believe you if things go south, right? Are they going to blame you if things aren't working out right? Why would you want to take on that liability? And so what are some of the psychological reasons for that, David?
Yeah, authority bias, right? Which is people believe an expert innately. They just do. We do. I do. And having an expert creates credibility for the request for additional money. And I've been to a lot of association meetings where the board has decided we need more money and it's never been quantified. It's never been reduced to a report. And I'm sitting there, charging a significant amount of money on an hourly basis that probably would have paid for the reserve study that would have likely quelled half of the resistance that we see in the room with just good data. And the other thing is, and this is, I say this a lot, the Dunning Kruger effect, but, homeowners, and that includes board members, and I'm a homeowner and Brian's a homeowner, we think we're better than we are in topics that are complicated. And we don't always know what it takes to keep a community running. And we often overestimate our understanding of all of the complicated procedures and components and the costs and the timing that would be encapsulated in a reserve study. And so we got to be careful of wanting to be a hero and thinking that it's easier than it is. It doesn't have to be complicated. But again, with water intrusion and building envelope issues and decks and balconies and siding and all these other things, there's a lot of moving pieces. And I would just say it's never quite as simple as we think. But that again, to me, it's one of the cheapest risk management tools an association that has appreciable responsibilities for infrastructure can invest in.
At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you'd like to join us in that mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below with what you'd like to see in a future webinar. Let's plan for your best future.